Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to my library tour for 2022. We're going through all the books in my collection to give myself a visual record of what I have and don't have at this particular time. And we've already done this room. We've done all of these books here in the little book room. So it's time for the library tour to move on, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that. I need to take control of this room. First of all, I would like to empty one whole floor-to-ceiling bookcase. I think that's possible to do. And also figure out where I want to go from here. So I'm filling in the gap with Libraries of the Lost, with accounts of books that I had at one point or another. I scanned their covers, but I don't have them anymore. To chat about them a little bit as part of this vast platonic ideal of a library in which I never got rid of any book that I ever bought under any circumstances. And this first one is a UK mass market paperback, if I remember correctly. This was Jane Ann Phillips' hugely celebrated short story debut, Black Tickets, which is, in my opinion, the first really weaponized example of what I refer to as hicklit, where an author examines the real daily lives of ordinary people in a way that, to me, I could make a case, resembles more a guided tour of some sort of 18th century freak show than it does any kind of real sympathy for people who live in trailer parks or single moms or whatever the usual targets of hicklit are. I have often, the authors of these things never fail to posture as people of the people. They never fail to posit these things as fictional chronicles of the people that the New Yorker crowd tends to forget, but they are always part of the New Yorker crowd. So there's a dissertation to be written on hicklit, I think, but nevertheless, these stories are by and large excellent. I don't have a copy. I don't have any Jane Ann Phillips right now, but the stories are really good, regardless of how I think they've been misused. Okay, well, all right. This next one is a little bit more dicey. This is a Harlequin category romance. Harlequin romance they don't just do Harlequin romances. You'll know that even if you don't know anything about Harlequin, but they also do lots of other category romances. They do historical romances and Christian-themed clean romances and a whole bunch of others. And for a while, they had a label called Harlequin Blaze that was far more explicit. And the nice thing about the Harlequin categories is that you know what you're getting beforehand. So it's sort of like an imprimatur kind of content warning. You know that you're not going to get anything from one category in another category. And the Harlequin Blaze that we have in mind for today is by Rebecca York. It's called Body Contact. This is out of print. I'm not even sure if this is still the current cover or the latest cover of it. I read this. I remember it quite well, and I read this a long time ago. I mean, long before our current ultra-puritanical censorious age. But even then, even when I read this, I thought, whoa, there's a lot of problems with this book. A young person is abducted by the evil villain of the plot, and the woman who was entrusted with the young person's care goes to a hard-bitten, extremely experienced man to help her retrieve the child. They know where the child is, and they know the tropical island where the child is being kept captive, and they figure that the best way to infiltrate that island would be to pretend that he is some sort of high-rolling, playboy, and that she is his latest sexual plaything. Okay, so far so good, but fairly early on in the book, he insists to her that in order to make that believable, he should probably sleep with her. I don't know that you could get this published today, and I don't think it worked particularly well in the novel then. Anyway, all right. Then we have this old 50-cent Signet volume. Good Lord, this probably fell apart on me. This is Boswell's London Journal. Frederick Pottle was a Boswell scholar who found a lot of Boswell stuff in the 20th century and made literally a cottage industry living off it. There are probably 15 volumes dealing with Boswell that have Pottle's name on them, as, edited, abridged, introduced, annotated, all that sort of thing. The London Journal that Boswell kept is by far the best thing. Boswell is, of course, famous for his life of Samuel Johnson. there's no Samuel Johnson quite so much hogging the limelight in this book. Instead, it's just Boswell's adventures in London, and they are amazing. They are absolutely amazing. I would put this book on the same level as Pepys's Diary, or even the autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, and yet it is not as well known as either one of those by a long shot, even though it had this volume, which sold really well. Bookstores sold out of this. Little kiosks on train platforms sold out of this thing. But also, Boswell's London Journal has a Penguin Classic. It's still not well enough known. It's terrific. It's a hoot. And passionate. It has pathos, whereas not always. Pepys doesn't always do that, and Benvenuto Cellini never does. Not in a way that you believe, or that would make you feel sorry for anybody. I don't have this old paperback anymore, but I have Boswell's London Journal in many different forms. Oh, wow, look at this. All right, well, I don't know where this cover comes from. This could also be a UK. It's certainly not the cover that I read this book with. I have no idea what became of this edition. This is Death at La Fenice, Donna Leone's very first Venice murder mystery. This is the first appearance that we get of Commissario Brunetti, where I believe it's a German conductor at La Fenice in Venice is killed, and he was hated by everybody. It's one of those classic murder mysteries where you are surrounded by suspects. You have no idea who. Everybody wanted the person dead, and it's our first introduction to Brunetti, to his life, to the way that he does his job as a cop in Venice. It's also our first introduction to Donna Leone's version of Venice, which has gone on to be spectacularly successful. This series is still going on. Up to, I don't even know, 25, 30 books and they're all good. They're all really good. I don't know many murder mysteries where I can say that, but I don't think I've read a Donna Leone. I've read them all. I don't think I've read one that misstepped. Okay, then we had, this was an old, I believe this was an old trade paperback, yeah, $5.95, of K.J. Dover's Greek Homosexuality. His groundbreaking study, really. This is the thing that sort of set the subject for the rest of time, where he tries to examine from, pottery and poetry and whatever, any sources that he can find, visual, archaeological, literary, tries to figure out what the Greeks actually thought about homosexuality, how it actually fit in their society. And he came up with sort of the basic template that we accept today, which is that there was a thing, the Greeks by their detractors, humorous or otherwise, are often called pederasts, but it was actually a phebophilia. That was what the Greeks did. It wasn't children. It was young men. It was younger men between the ages of 18 and 25, who would be sought after and possessed, kept, squired by older men, not very old men. The older men would be at most 10 years older, maybe 15, but not anything older than that. Anything older than that, no. And the situation was transactional in as much as it was emotional. The older man would give the younger man guidance on how to enter society, guidance on how to be who they are and how to be a man, instruction in physical fitness, in social deportment, in all sorts of things, really. Management of landed estates in most cases. And also, most importantly, societal entree, where it was viewed as hugely impertinent for even a handsome young man to just intrude on, a high-profile literary dinner or a high-profile political dinner. They could be there if they had the sort of tutelage of an older man, and that formed a couple. And Dover goes on at great length about whether or not there was a sexual element to that couple, and how prominent it was, how important a part of the solution it was, or the situation. And he also goes on at great length about where that pattern fit in terms of class in society. Was it done and sanctioned in the upper classes, but not really done nor sanctioned in the middle classes, and not done at all in the lower classes? Were there echoes? Was this a pattern in Greek society just across the board, that an older man would be married and who was what we would call heterosexual, and the younger man was too? There was no thought that the older man and the younger man would take up and live together. There was no thought of that at all. If the relationship lasted too long, if the younger man became too old enough so that he could start a family and start his own farmhead and have his own children, including sons, who he would then watch become squired by older men, if that younger man got too old, then the whole thing went south. Then we know that all rungs of society thought it was disgraceful. But we don't know how much other people did this, how prevalent this was in Greek society and what people thought about it. The thing you want more than anything else, when your Dover is a little bit dry, he's very thorough, but he's a little bit dry, and you want nothing more than on this subject or a whole bunch of other subjects for somebody to have thought, all these wicked smart ancient Greeks, you want somebody to have thought, why don't I just interview people and write their stories down? No one ever thought to do that. So we don't know, and this is the best systematic approach to what we do know that's available. I think there's a later edition of it that has Dover himself in his original edition concentrates exclusively on homosexuality, not on lesbianism at all, and doesn't even try to examine whether or not there was something similar for women, even in the upper classes of society. He tries to figure out, he doesn't try to examine whether or not there was anything analogous. It would be unlikely, I think, that there would be anything analogous at this time, despite the fact that the Greeks at these time periods were first formulating and actually enunciating the idea of individual personal liberty. They weren't doing it for everybody. They weren't doing it for the gigantic number of slaves in their society. They weren't doing it for the women in their society. They certainly weren't doing it for the little girls in their society. So I doubt that such a relationship was possible. A key thing on which it hinged was the social power of the older man. That's what the younger man got out of it. Unless the older man happened to be exceptionally attractive, then the younger man, for sowing their wild oats on either side of the gender aisle, the young men typically resorted to each other. Unless the older man was exceptionally attractive, it was viewed as sort of the current moving in only one direction. What the young man got out was great introductions, the ability to be poised, the ability to have a way to be in the world, a kind of finish, a kind of polish, what the Italians in the Renaissance called sprezzatura. The young man had no way to learn that other than this way, and that was the exchange. The young men had no way to learn. They learned that, and the older men got the prestige of having a really beautiful young man on their arm. It gave them a second shot at a youth of their own. Most of the older men who were doing this kind of, I'm calling it squiring because I'm not mentoring, sounds too academic. The older men who were doing this had been these younger men, two older men themselves. So it gives them a little shot of vigor. Anyway, if you're interested in the subject, there are 4 or 5 key books to read. And Dover's will always be one of them. So, it's had 1 million print editions. I'm sure you can find a copy. Okay, this next one is by Michael Curtis Ford. It is The Last King. And it's about Mithridates, the king of Pontus, who did not look like the guy on the cover. I'm assuming that the cover artist is just saying this must be one of his soldiers. He's a fascinating figure. I wish that we knew more about him than we do. And this is a historical novel that tries to reconstruct what Mithridates' life was like. Holding out against the Roman imperial machine hopelessly, and also all of the backstabbing and wheeling and dealing and bloodletting they had to do to keep and hold his throne. So I had this as a mass market paperback. Never seen it since. Oh, wow. Okay, now this is one that I wish. There aren't many of these. When we do the Library of the Lost, I look at these things and think, boy, I haven't seen this in a long time, or, oh, this was interesting, or whatnot. But there aren't many of these things that I would instantly grab if I saw them at the Brattle. And this next one is one of them. It's a classic in the work of biography. It's by William Henry Hawbar, and it's called The Life and Times of Theodore Roosevelt. And you know that you've written a great book on Theodore Roosevelt when you get a cover blurb from Hubert Humphrey. Most of you, I'm assuming, don't have any idea who Hubert Humphrey is, but that's pretty amazing. That's the get of all possible gets. And I remember the book that I scanned here, and it was a crappy old trade paperback. I'm sure that it fell apart on me when I read it. What I wouldn't give to find a hardcover of this book at the Brattle. It had a good, healthy-sized print run as a hardcover. It sold well because it was tremendously good. One of the best Theodore Roosevelt biographies ever written. And I maintain that one of the ways that you can almost guarantee that that will be true is if the author of the biography has lived a life, as opposed to living in the archives, studying the subject of their biography. If they've lived a life on their own, and William Henry Harbaugh did live a life of his own, right down the line, he lived a life of his own. He was again, a lot of you don't know the name Hubert Humphrey. Maybe a few of you, more of you would know the name Branch Rickey. But William Henry Harbaugh was tapped by Branch Rickey to play Major League Baseball. There aren't many people who can say that, who then went on to write a biography of Theodore Roosevelt. And it didn't work. And he went to World War II. And in World War II, you would think, okay, so, where in Cincinnati was he a filing clerk? But no, he was in combat many, many times. He was at the front lines in a few different major theaters, including as part of General Patton's army. And then came home and wrote a life of Theodore Roosevelt. And the life is amazing. It's amazingly good. Full of opinion, not only Roosevelt's, but also Harbaugh's, and full of, the cheesy word would be zest, but it definitely matches its subject. That Roosevelt has had, mainstream publishing since this book came out. He's probably had 50 biographies. And yet this one is still one to have. I don't know how available secondhand copies are. But boy, oh boy, that's one that I wish I still had. Oh, now, all right, this one would be another example of that, except that by now it's outdated. It would be a nostalgia buy if I found it. This was a hardcover. Boy, I don't know why I got rid of this. This is a complete illustrated guide to the predatory dinosaurs of the world. And there you have something that very much was not a predatory dinosaur. That is my fat little hippo. That is my little hippo Lucy, who used to pose with a lot of my books. But this was a hardcover. I've only usually seen this as a trade paperback. It's a look at as much as was popularly known in small detail about the predatory dinosaurs in the fossil record. There's a lot more that we know now, a lot more. So I don't know. If I saw this thing, I would probably think, well, how interesting, but what would be the point of owning such an outdated book? Because I don't remember it being particularly enjoyably written. I think it was mainly designed to be a reference work. So I don't know that I would grab it again. All right, we're hitting a vein here. All right, this is by Robert Tudor Moss. This is the only book that he ever wrote. This is a travel log. He traveled through Syria decades ago and wrote a book called Cleopatra's Wedding Present, which is a reference to the fact that Mark Antony gave Cleopatra most of the area that Moss was walking through as a wedding present. And once again, we have a little intrusion there. That is the enormous head and gigantic spatulate paws of my old Basset Hound Lucy. And that's the cover. It's a superimposed handsome young man's face looking at the barren wasteland of Syria. In this case, not so far off the mark, because Robert Tudor Moss was a very attractive looking young man and had been urged by all of his friends to write all the time. You have a blazing literary talent. Please write all the time. He finally wrote this book and was murdered right after he wrote this book. So there are no others. That's a terrible shame. But this, I believe, this copy, judging from its comparison to Lucy's enormous head, I'm gathering that this was a hardcover. I've seen mass market paperbacks of this that have. I saw one mass market paperback edition once upon a time that had a fetching picture of the author in a skin-tight tank top, which doesn't happen with Norman Mailer. I would love to have it again, but okay. All right, then we have the last one for today. This was a crappy little mass market paperback, so it didn't last long. This has been reprinted many, many times. I'm sure there are electronic versions of it. And once again, there are those deep, big, brown, brainless eyes. This is Erasmus and Luther. This was a little paperback that collected their famous cannonades against each other that they did back and forth on the subject of free will. It's an amazing theological discourse. It really is. It's amazing. People had been urging Erasmus for a long time, to respond to Luther, this firebrand who everyone in Europe was talking about, specifically on religious grounds, and on grounds that connected very intimately with with the humanism that Erasmus championed. So all sorts of people, not just normal readers, but leaders, church leaders, even secular leaders, wondering, what does Erasmus make of Luther? How would Erasmus handle Luther? And then finally they did it. They had the literary equivalent of the thriller in Manila. It's amazingly good reading. It's a little bit muddied these days, where the subject of free will has gone through such weird permutations, such weird, strange permutations, so to the point where you've got prominent atheist thinkers like I think Matt Dillahunty or Aaron Ra, and you've got prominent I hesitate to call Sam Harris an atheist. I think it's pretty obvious that he's not one, but you get people like that just outright saying there's no such thing as free will. And what follows when they describe to you in their best dude bro fashion why there's no such thing as free will is a veritable tsunami of casuistry, a type that I don't know what to do when all of a sudden so-called public intellectuals are spouting such nonsense. There has to be something in the groundwater, something that I'm not understanding. My one hypothesis on the subject of why people as smart as Sam Harris say there's no such thing as free will is because in their adulthood, the world has largely gone to hell, and it's done so against their own will. So of course they're starting to think, well, we're all just puppets. we're all just automaton. We just think we have free will, but we don't. You of course do. You of course do. Leave it to philosophers, cod philosophers, big thinkers, that sort of thing. Leave it to thought leaders to muddy a subject that a small child understands to be true. Leave it to them to do that. Of course you have free will. You don't have control over every single atom of the universe. You cannot make a tree fall by looking at it. You cannot make a mountain shake to its roots by thinking hard about it. That doesn't mean you don't have free will at all. The kind of arguments that I've heard on the subject, at least the one thing you can say about them is that they would equally have baffled Luther and Erasmus. They would have had a lot of other things to say, but they would have both been baffled by, what on earth are you thinking? But anyway, that is a little paperback of this. I would love an edition of this discourse that I'm sure exists. I'm sure that one was done in, for instance, the 19th century. I would love an English language translation of the collection of these papers with a great introduction and a fantastic barrage of notes. A barrage of notes that chases down the theological and scriptural allusions that Erasmus and Luther both make by the truckload. I would love that. Absolutely love that. I don't know if such a thing exists. I keep an eye out in the theology section of the Brattle all the time, just in case there's an edition that I don't know about. But anyway, that's your Library of the Lost for today. A bunch of books that I no longer have, or the editions that I no longer have. I'm going to wrap this up for now, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.